Hi, my name is Michael Swartz. In this tutorial, we'll take a look at UV mapping for polygonal geometry. It's a beginner to intermediate lesson. So what are UVs? UVs are essentially a 2D texture coordinate system for 3D geometry. And all of these objects here on the screen are polygonal, and they all already have UV maps that have been generated. Now, speaking of generating UVs, all of the primitives that are found under polygon primitive, they all have UVs already created for you. And you can see them in the UV texture editor window. And so here is the UV, the 2D coordinate system for this sphere. And if you notice, as I grab a series of UV points here, it selects what appear to be vertices on the sphere here. And that's because a UV point has a vertex twin. So they're linked up together. But, however, you cannot move UVs in three-dimensional space. You can only move UVs in two-dimensional space, in U and in V, U being horizontal and V in vertical. And you can use your move tool, you can use your rotate tool, and you can scale them as well. So those are some very rudimentary, basic things that you can do with UVs. We're going to get into a lot more detail though. Before we get started, I want to show you how I lay out my scene. So one way is you can open up this window and just have it hovering around you, and you can resize it. I often just like to use one of these saved layouts. So if you go to Panels, Saved Layouts, you can select this Perspective UV Texture Editor layout. And now we have our 3D view here, and we can very quickly go back and forth. And if I need to go into either one of them specifically, I just hit the space bar. Okay, so, and that's kind of a pain to grab. It's like, several levels down, nested into a menu. So I'll show you a little trick that could come in handy down the road for other things as well. And that is, if you go into the script editor, you can turn on Echo All Commands, and then go to Panels, Saved Layouts, Perspective UV Texture Editor. Let's turn off Echo All Commands now. And if you notice up here at the top, there is a line that it generated when we opened up that panel. And I'm just going to grab that, middle mouse it up into my shelf, right click on that, go to Shelves, and I'll name it UV LT for UV layout. Okay, save. So now whenever I need that view, even if I'm in a quad view, a 4-up view, I can click that button and it will bring me right back to this. So this is how I do a lot of my work. And I just want to quickly look at these. So that's the primitive plane. It has UVs already assigned. These two are also primitive planes, but then I rotated the vertices downward for demonstration purposes. So a plane is easy. All you do is a planar projection map, and you're pretty much done. And that stuff is all found up under here, Create UVs, and I'll pull that panel off just to show you. Planar mapping, if you go to the options, there's a project from the y-axis that's up and down. That's what we want. And we want to use bounding box as well. I'll talk about best plane in a moment. So we're going to use bounding box project from the y-axis, and we want to have the keep image width height ratio turned on. And if we click project, it creates basically the same thing that we just had. We just overwrote the UVs and replaced them with the same thing. But that's the process. Now something like this is a little tougher. If I delete the UVs from this, okay, now it has no UVs, so we cannot assign a 2D texture map to this. It won't know what to do. It will just look like this. And by the way, this is one of Maya 2015's new features. You can click on this checker pattern here, and it will show you the UV layout as a checker pattern texture. on anything selected, but you need to be in viewport 2.0. So now if I did that same projection in Y, look what happens. Now we have what appears to be uniform grids for the top part, this part right here, but this bottom part, they're no longer square, they're rectangular. And that's because the texture is looking straight down, and of course there's not very much surface area if you look straight down. So we need to undistort the texture here. If I look at this with the checker pattern, you can see that the top is square and these are being compressed, or stretched rather. See how it's being stretched? These are rectangular instead of squares. So to fix that, you could do it manually just by using a scale tool. So we could do that. Let's just move our pivot point right here, and we could scale it out, and you can see that that is removing some of the distortion. And we could also do 2 planar projections. So let's try that. I'm going to delete the UVs on this, turn off the checker, and let's do 1 planar projection for these faces. So I'll make a selection of those faces. Okay, so we'll do a planar projection there. And then I'll make another projection, but this time for the bottom part. Okay, but this time if I do a planar mapping again, I want to change this so that it actually selects the best plane. And usually this works pretty well, and you might have to make a few adjustments, but let's give it a shot. All right, so it worked very well. Sometimes it will rotate, but you can always fix that. So I'm going to close this window out now. So now we have 2 separate shells, but they happen to be right on top of one another. If I click on this blue icon here, it will show us the shells. Blue is good. That means that the normals are facing in the positive direction. And if I select a single UV, so I right click, UV, click once with my left mouse button, and command right click or control right click on the PC to shell. Now I have the shell selected, and that appears to be the bottom shell. I'm looking over here in my viewport, and I'm just going to align it here, and if I select the edges along the texture here, watch what happens. As I'm clicking on this edge right here, it also selected this edge over here. So they're actually matched up. Same with all of these. They're all matched up. So it looks like it's actually rotated. It's flipped around. So I need to take this shell. So again, I select any of the UV points on it. And then I just select Command, right-click to shell. And I'm going to rotate it using the rotation tool. Okay, and now if we select the edges, they match up. So I'm going to just select these edges all the way across and merge them together. So I'm going to move and sew the UV edges. All right, now let's take a look, check the texture on it, and they're all uniform again. Okay, so now there is a problem though. Maya likes to have, you can change this, but Maya by default assumes that your texture is going to be in the 0 to 1 UV space, okay, in this upper quadrant of the grid. Let me turn off that texture. So ours is slightly off of that. We could just move it manually, or to be more accurate, you could set it up to take up the entire space under the layout. So if I go into the options of layout and make sure that the scaling is happening uniformly and it's going into the region, and we don't want any rotation. Let's click Layout UVs, and boom, it pops it up there automatically for us. Let's look at this cube. Now, cube is a little more complicated in that it just has sides facing in all different directions. 6 different directions are represented here, and if we do a planar mapping on this, it's not going to come out right. It's going to have all these faces on top of one another, and some of them are going to be almost non-existent because there's no surface area to them. So we can't do it that way, but there is something called automatic mapping. And automatic mapping inside of the settings here for automatic mapping actually has an option for 6-sided projection. So we could use this. So I'm going to select less distortion and click apply, and you can see what it's done. It's made 6 separate shells. Okay, and this is totally fine. You could very well just start painting and this would be absolutely fine. In fact, this method is pretty acceptable because it takes good advantage of as much UV space as possible. Whereas the original one, you can see the squares are much smaller. Okay, so you want to give those faces as much UV real estate as possible. Okay, let's take a look at the cylinder. So the cylinder, like I said earlier, all these primitives have UVs automatically when you create them. And this is what you get with a cylinder. And at first glance, it seems pretty logical. The caps would have to be separate. They can't really be connected to this. But there's a new feature in Maya that will reveal some problems with this. So if we turn on this new feature, it's called Display UV Distortion. This is new in 2015. It will show us what areas are stretched or compressed or optimal. White is optimal, and blue is compressed, and red is stretched. And this is a little tricky to wrap your head around at first, but basically when I say stretched, I'm talking about the texture is being stretched. So if I look at this as a checker pattern, let's turn that UV distortion off and turn on the checker, you can see that the texture is indeed stretched. There are really long horizontal rectangles here. Okay, but what we want is the actual texture is perfect squares. So this is considered stretched. So to unstretch it, we have to actually use more UV space to remove that stretching, that texture stretching. And it looks like the entire width of the UV space here needs to be used to get it back to a square shape, and now it matches the top and the bottom. So this is just an example of where the default UVs are not actually optimal. There's another way that we could pretty quickly fix this stretching problem, and that is by using another new feature that's nested within the unfold option. So if you go into unfold, there's a new feature called unfold 3D. And it actually works really well. I'm very pleased with it. It's a fast way to unfold stuff. You may or may not see it. Let me just show you really quickly. If you don't see that option and you're working in Maya 2015, it may be because the plugin got turned off, which can happen sometimes. So somewhere down here, probably about a quarter of the way down the list, is one called Unfold 3D Bundle. And just make sure those are both checked. And then you'll see this option. Otherwise, you'll only see the legacy option, which is still actually quite good. There's a lot of good things in here. You can pin UVs and unwrap things around those pinned UVs, so it can be very handy. And I'm glad they kept it there and they didn't get rid of it. But the Unfold 3D works great. Watch this. All I have to do, click Apply, and it maps everything so that there's little to no distortion on on those shells, so that you can see the texture is nice and square, just like the actual texture. And if I turn off that checker pattern and then look at the distortion again with that tool, you can see it's pretty much equal, it's uniform, it's nearly bright white, which indicates that there's little stretching. Okay, now the caps on these would have to be separate shells like that, but if I were to manually have to do this, what I might do is start with a cylindrical projection. So let's delete these UVs, okay, and then go up to Create UVs, Cylindrical Mapping. And so what it's done now, this cylindrical map, it's only projecting around the y-axis. So these caps are right on top of each other. You can't even see them. It's just a straight line across. You can see that overhangs here a little bit here on the end. So you definitely have to do those separately. And so I'm going to do that now. I'm going to just look down from the top, select just the caps. Okay, and now we'll do a separate projection in the y-axis. We'll use a bounding box, keep image width height ratio, click project. Okay, now we have all these shells, but they're right on top of one another. So to see that a little bit better, if you activate this toggle shaded UV display, we can see that which shells are on top of each other and which direction they're facing. Blue means that it's facing in the positive direction of the normal, and red means it's flipped. Purple means that there's probably red and blue somewhere, so we need to find the one that's flipped. So I'm going to just click one time on that UV, command right click to shell, and just move this out of the way, and it looks like I actually selected the one that is flipped. So to unflip it, you can just click on one of these buttons here. These will flip the UV. Now it's facing in the right direction. And when I say facing in the right direction, let me show you. If I select the geometry and go to Display, Polygons, Face Normals, you can see that each one of these faces has a normal, and it's pointing outward. And if we go inside the object, they aren't pointing inside here. That's because this is the other side of those polygons. That's considered the reverse side. So if I had this flipped, now the UVs are reversed, so effectively the texture is going to be flipped for that particular shell. So it can be problematic when you're painting, because you'd be painting backwards basically. I'm going to flip that back, and let's also move this one out of the way. So select the UV, command right click to shell, and let's move it up here next to this one. Okay, and now I'm going to take a look at the checker pattern on this. So I'll turn off that, turn on the checker pattern, and you can see that actually they're pretty uniform, except there is a little bit of stretching going on with this middle shell. So I'm going to take that and select the entire shell and just scale it a little bit so that I'm removing the stretching. Okay, now there's still a problem though. If I turn off the checker here, you can see that it's overlapping and going outside of the 0 to 1 UV coordinate space. So to put those all back where they belong, I'm just going to use that handy unfold option, and that will bring it all into the 0 to 1 space and nicely remove a lot of the distortion that was there as well at the same time. Let's turn off the UV distortion tool and turn off the face normals. Let's move over to the cone here, and let's look at the distortion on this. Yeah, so again, these are the default settings for this, and it's not optimal. You can see that the top part is being stretched. So that again, once again, that means that the texture itself is stretched because the UVs are not spread out enough. So if we want to remove the stretching in that, we would have to select this row and scale it out to remove some of that stretching. Okay, and likewise with the cap here on the bottom cap, if I select that whole shell, it looks like it's not scaled to match the upper one. So if I scale it down a little bit, it turns white, and that means that it's a little more optimal and uniform with its neighboring UVs. Now let's see what the unfold option does to this. So that's pretty interesting. It does remove quite a bit of the distortion, and I like how it filleted this thing out like a fan, and it definitely, I think, did a better job than the vertical alignment that it had by default. So yeah, I think that was a pretty good solution. So this new Unfold 3D tool wins yet again. I think that's a good point. Now you can see the texture seam here, and you're generally you're always working around a texture seam of some sort with a 2D texture, whether it's around the border of a map or right in the middle here. All of these are going to be texture seams. All of the boundaries of these UVs are going to be seams when you paint textures, and you just want to hide them somewhere where it's not as visible. Let's look at the next one over here, the torus. So here are the default UVs, and let's look at the distortion on it. So you can see the tops and the bottoms are optimal. There's very little distortion in these areas, right? But on the inside, there's some compression going on, and on the outside, there's some stretching. Let's look at the texture to see what that means. So yeah, you can see that along the top, you know, somewhere around here, the textures are closer to a square, but inside they start to get a little compressed, and on the outside they get really stretched. So that's a tough one. Let's try the unfold and see if that works. And it looks like it actually did a really nice job of getting rid of a lot of that distortion. There's still a little bit of distortion, but it's pretty hard to avoid. At least some distortion on an organic shape like this. There's always going to be some sort of compromise between fewer pieces and distortion. If I wanted to, I could do a little further work on this and maybe select all of these in a row, and I could snap them together and move it up a little bit, and I'll do the same on the bottom here. Okay, so snap those into a row. All right, now with those two rows snapped, what I'm going to do is show you something in the legacy option. And so if you were painting this in Photoshop and you wanted to have a straight edge there to make it a little easier to deal with that seam, you could straighten them out like this. Once again, I use this tool here called the Align Selected UVs to Minimum UV Value button. And so those snapped into a straight row, and now I can go to Polygons, Unfold, and I'm going to turn on the Legacy option, and let's pin those UVs that are selected. Okay, and then all the other ones are going to be unfolded. So let's try applying that, and you can see it's done another type of unfold, and we've constrained the top and the bottom, and that could be helpful for you. It depends on what you're trying to paint. But I'm going to select all of that and select all the UVs here, click apply. There we go. Okay, so that works pretty well for the torus. And you know, it's displaying that there's compression going on, but it's actually a pretty accurate model. The only thing I can think of is maybe stretching it a little wider like this. You know, and you can play around with the scale. Something like that. And we have to scale it down. There's just not a lot more you can do with this. I think that's pretty much as good as it's going to get. Okay, and the sphere. So when you create a polysphere, it generates this UV map, and the problem with this is that spheres are generally equirectangular, which means that they're twice as wide as they are tall. It's kind of like when you look at a world map, there's some distortion at the poles, but the way that we draw those maps is as an equirectangular shape. And this is square, so there's got to be tons of distortion on this default UV projection. Let's take a look. Display UV textures, and yeah, you can see that there's just a lot of stretching going on. And there's not much you can do about the poles. Those are always going to be problematic on a sphere, but as it is in a world map, for that matter, they definitely take a lot of liberties in world maps to make them viewable. So speaking of equirectangular maps or spherical images, I will show you how that looks, or how that would work on a sphere like this. So I'm going to just, I turned off the UV distortion indicator and hit Shift T to bring up the new material window. And I'll just assign a Lambert, and I'll assign a file to the color. And this is an image I took at UMass Dartmouth. You can see right away that it's assigned the texture, and if we go inside of this and turn on two-sided lighting and look at this a little bit bigger, you can see that the entire environment is mapped around the sphere with no distortion. And that's because this image is equirectangular. This image, which is twice as wide as it is tall, so you could think about this just like a world map. In fact, I have a texture of the Earth. And let's see, it's day. Let's look at this day. So here we go. Same deal, this is an equirectangular image. This is how a sphere looks when it's unwrapped. So we could paste it right on top of that, and you can see they're the same size. They're twice as wide as they are tall. It's an equirectangular image. And there's always going to be, when you look at it this way, there's always stretching. But when you apply it to a sphere, that goes away. Okay, so the other thing to note about this is if you look at this in the UV texture editor window, you can see that Maya squishes it to fit within that 0 to 1 range. Just want to point out one more thing in regards to working with non-square textures. If you find it too distracting to look at it squished like this, you can actually go up to Image, use Image Ratio, and that will change it so that it's not distorted or compressed into a square grid. And yeah, that can be very helpful. You can make better decisions this way in terms of changing the UV so they're less distorted. All right, next thing I'd like to look at is the spaceship here. And I did already put UVs on this. but I'm going to delete them and show you how I went about creating this layout. So I'm going to delete the UVs, and basically what I do is I select the faces that I think I can make into it using a single projection. So I'm going to just select the tops here, and let's do a planar projection, and we're going to go in the y-axis. Could use best plane, but be sure to keep this image width height ratio on, because if you don't, it will stretch it to fill the whole UV coordinate space. Let me show you what I mean. If I turn that off and click apply, look what it's done. It's actually stretched it to fill the whole 0 to 1 space, and it's distorted it too. So let's undo that. Let's use bounding box. Best plane is fine, but this time keep image width height ratio is on. And now it's correct and appropriate, and it's not distorted. However, it's rotated, and this is one of the problems with best plane. It's making a guess, and based on the change in topology here, it's flat here, but then it goes up and then over and then down. It's making a guess, and it guessed incorrectly. So you could just manually rotate this using that little crosshair tool on the side over here, and just do this and straighten it out. Or you could rotate it inside the UV window itself, just like this. Or you could just, instead of using the best plane option, use bounding box, and that will just use world space. So we'll click project. All right, and you know, it's looking straight down, but this ship is slightly at an angle, so I would select this little crosshair on the side, and then click once on the circle there for rotation, and just get it into relative alignment. And it's really only making a very minimal difference, so it's almost not even worth it. But that's fine. I think that's fine. Let's move on to the next piece. So we'll do the window. I'm going to hit Shift, period. Okay, to increase my selection. And let's do another planar mapping. Try best plane, and that did a pretty good job. We'll worry about scaling these things uniformly when we're done making all of these projections. Okay, the next pieces are going to be the top here. Select these. Okay, and I think I can do the tops of the wings as well. I'm skipping the fin because I'm going to project that from the side. Okay, now I'm not going to use the best plane on this one. I have a feeling it will rotate it again. So I'm going to just use a bounding box, project in the y-axis. Okay, all right, that looks pretty good. There are a couple panels that are rotated, but it's pretty uniform. We may just have to adjust the wings slightly, but it's not too bad. We'll get to that. All right, and then let's do the fin. Okay, once again, and I'm going to do the sides separate. Project. And now let's do the sides. Oh, I accidentally projected in the y-axis. I'm going to undo that. But in this time I want to go in X, side to side. Okay. And let's now work on the sides. I'm going to just open this up a little wider. It's difficult to see everything. Okay. Okay, let's project along X. And now let's do the front. I'm going to select inside first, select these three, and then shift period to increase my selection, and then I'll shift click on those. And this one will be down the Z axis. All right, and then the bottom of the ship. Alright, that'll go down the y-axis. Okay, I'm sure I missed a few pieces, but I want to see which ones those are. So to do that, let's go back and look at the UVs here, and I'm just going to select all of the faces, and you can see which ones I've missed. So I just need to put a couple more projections on those, and then I'm done. So let's take care of the wings first. The wings, I'll just do the front and backs. Okay, and that's going to be down the y-axis. I mean the z-axis, excuse me, z-axis. And let's do the sides of the wings. And that'll be along X. And let's do the back of the ship. That should be around and down the Z-axis. Okay. So now let's double check and see if I missed anything. Select faces in the UV texture editor window, and you can see any missing faces, and it looks like I got everything. Okay, so now our challenge is to do some UV layout. There should be pretty minimal distortion on this because I was careful in my projections and made sure that they were aligned with the polygon faces. But even still, there's going to be problems in this. Some of the projections were for big pieces, and some were for some small pieces, and when you project on a small piece, it still uses the full range, so the scale is not uniform across all these different shells. So that's something we're going to have to look at. But the first thing I'd like to do is just to kind of lay these things out, separate them, and we're going to have to put it together like a jigsaw puzzle. So right here, this toggle shaded UV display, I'm going to turn that on, and it will show me which faces are flipped, which UVs are flipped rather. So I'm going to select this shell, command right click to shell, and we'll just move that down, and I'm going to select that one UV, hit the G key to repeat the to shell operation, and move that up, and here's another one. And let's see, let's look at that. That one is flipped. That looks like the bottom of the ship. So I'm going to flip that right here. Okay, that one's also flipped. looks like the fin, and that's flipped. So I'm going to flip it back that way. And it looks like that's the other one. So those, just put over here to the side for now. That's the front of the ship. You can see how big it is in comparison to the other pieces. That would have to be scaled down. Okay, I'm not sure what that is, but it's the side of the wing, also very large. But let's flip that so it's blue. Same deal. That is the back corner of the ship, and it's flipped. So put that that way. And what's this piece right here? Looks like front of the wing. Okay, that one's flipped. That looks like the window. So, you know, the window, it makes more sense to me to rotate that the way that it looks. So I'm just going to rotate that counterclockwise. And, you know, it will eventually go somewhere up there, but I'll put it over here for now just to get it out of the way. That's the top of the fin. That's flipped. Okay. Okay. So we have all our pieces broken out, and now it's time to study the scale of these textures and to put them into place. So again, this is a really great tool, this checker pattern, and we can see which pieces need to be scaled differently. So I would say that the maximum we ever want to go for the pieces is probably about as big as this, maybe a little less, so I'll scale that down. And this is the bottom of the ship, so I need to make sure I also have room for the top pieces, so I'll just keep that onto the side. And let's look at the top. It looks like these are the top pieces. I'm going to select just a few UVs there and command right click to shell, and also the front of the ship right there. So they're all selected, and I'm going to scale them uniformly. And I can use the length of the wing to match that up. And if I hold down the D key, I can move the pivot point and scale it from that point, so I can really line it up. Let's move that up. It looks like that needs to be scaled down a little bit. Oh, not. We want to do it uniformly. Okay. And then that window, where's the window? Here's the window. I'll bring that up here, hit the F key to frame in on that, and let's scale that down. Now there are some overhanging edges here, and we need to relax those. Before I do that, let me just scale this up a little more. Okay, and what I'm going to do is just select the outer corners. Oop. Okay, and now I'm going to pin those UVs, and this is where the legacy unfold actually comes in really handy. You can select just those UVs and we'll pin them. So you click on legacy, pin UVs, pin selected UVs, and it's going to relax the ones inside. Okay, cool. So that you can see it was subtle, but there's a bit of an edge there that we want to capture. We don't want it to have any problems. Okay, and I think there's a little bit of distortion here. It's minimal, but if you wanted to, you could probably eliminate a lot of that distortion just by matching up these corners a little bit more, this angle rather. Or just select the whole shell and move it up a little bit, and we can use a lattice. So we could go to Tool, UV Lattice Tool, and select these two, and select these. Just move them out a little bit, like that. Okay, yeah, the lattice is really handy for making subtle adjustments like that. Okay, and let's work on the fin. I'm going to turn off the checker pattern for a moment. So here are the sides of the fin, and I need to find the top. So here's the top. And we want to scale the top so that it's the same uniform size as the other pieces. So we'll just bring that down like that. Fit it into place. I'm just using this for reference to scale it for now. I'm going to actually move it to the side. Okay, so that's pretty good. And I'm going to move it over here now that I have it scaled and I know it's correct. I'm going to now do the same to these pieces. Scale those down. Rotate. And let's see, is this the front? Yes, it is. So this part, I'm going to line it up with that piece so it's a little more logical. And now it's just a matter of stitching and sewing these together so that it's all one piece. And there's no perfect solution to this, but we'll do the best we can to get as few pieces in distortion as possible. So what I'll do is just select one of these edges and see where it matches up. So you can see it matches up with that, and if I go to Polygon, Move and Sew Edges, it will automatically snap up to that. And same with this side. And I'll just hit the G key to repeat that operation. Now this, if we zoom in on that, you can see that there's some pretty heavy distortion and overlapping. So to fix that, I'm going to just select those UVs right there and go to Tool, Smooth UV Tool, and I'll just unfold them and relax a little bit. And same down here, I'm going to relax those as well. Unfold first. Actually, the unfold seems to be working a little better. Okay. The unfold tool is basically the same as unfold here, except you can manually control the amount of iterations just by dragging and sliding your mouse. All right, I'm gonna snap these up. I'm a perfectionist, so I'm gonna just snap those up so that they're right in line with each other. Okay. And I want to make sure there's no distortion there, so I mean, it is a small area, but I don't want to have any distortion there. Let's go to Smooth UV Tool again. Perhaps we need to relax it a little bit. Okay. And if you look at the top of that fin, yeah, right there, that shape is not present there. So I'm going to bring that down a little bit to match. Okay. Okay. So let's check on the distortion now. And it's looking good so far. There's a little bit of distortion here, so we'll have to take a look at that. And that fixed that, so just a little bit of unfolding on that centerpiece. Did a lot. I'm going to undo that. I think it was better the way it was. Okay, let's turn off the checker pattern and move on to the next piece. Let's take a look at that. What piece is that? That's the back of the ship. So the back of the ship could probably move over here. I'm going to select the edge there, and yep, there it is. So let's move and sew. And notice it's not scaled correctly, so we should actually bring this over first. Scale it down manually. Okay, and then these edges, I'll just select all those and move and sew. Okay, let's do the next part. The pieces up here are the front sides of the ship. So I'm going to move all those over here, and let's figure out which one is which. So if I select that edge, you can see it's selected this edge over here. So, and they actually look pretty closely aligned. So let me just try a move and sew operation. And it looks like it actually moved the UVs a little, so it's a little bit off. I'm going to manually scale these down to match that edge. So yeah, it's just slightly too big. Okay, that looks pretty good. So now I'll select that edge, move and sew, and let's do that edge, and move and sew. Just want to make sure there's no overlap here. Okay, these, the window, I'm going to move and sew those as well as those edges. And it will snap all these pieces together, and we'll have to fix some of the distortion that results from this operation, but I think it'll be better all merged together as one shell. Let's move and sew. So it shuffled things around a little bit, but I think it will pay off. Now I'm going to select the, let's select these UVs right here and make sure they're in a straight line, and select the ones in, oh, we'll do this row right here, also snapped to a straight line. Select all those, and let's use the smooth UV tool to unfold and relax. I think unfold is just fine. Okay. All right. I don't want to snap these edges together because they are at an angle, so it may be problematic. I can try taking just these UVs on either side and using the smooth tool and unfolding them. You know, you might get away with it. Let's see. The best way is just to check it. Let's turn on the checker pattern and take a look at that piece. And it's hard to tell. Let's try snapping these together. So you select the edge. And go to Sew UV Edges. So that's before, after, before, after. It actually works pretty well. I'm surprised. All right, so we'll connect those up together. All right, now let's deal with the front of the ship. So here's the front. I'm going to turn off the checker pattern as well. Move this into position. Scale it. Now, the front of the ship, when I did this projection, it was a planar projection straight down, so you can't see the sides of these. So to fix that, I'm going to have to select I just drag around those UVs and use the relax tool. So go to smooth UV and then relax those. And I may even need to unfold it as well. Yeah. And then I can, I know it's going to be aligned with these vertices, so I'm going to snap those into a straight line and then move it down. So all of these UVs are in a nice straight line. Okay, and now this piece right here, this shell, can be scaled down. Okay. And now let's fit some of these miscellaneous parts, sides of the wings and so on. Let's see what this is. If I select this edge, it will tell us where it goes, and it's over here on the side. So I need to take these and scale them down. I'm going to rotate them holding the J key. Scale down uniformly. Okay. Okay, so that one matches. Let's do polygon, move and sew. And same with that one. That's going to go over here. But that's going on to a different shell, so I want it to be on the same shell so it's symmetrical, so I'll select that one instead. And we'll go to polygon, move and sew. All right. Okay, next. That is the back corner of the wing. Here's the other one. Let's see how those match up. If I select the edge here, it matches up to that. And it actually looks pretty close, but I think it'll still need some scaling. But if I do scale it, I want to scale it at the same time as I scale the other one, so I don't have to worry about it being slightly off. So we'll scale them at the same time, make sure that matches up. All right, that's good. Select those edges, move and sew. Move and sew. And I think these edges could be sewn together as well. Okay, next, what are those? front and back of the wing. So that being said, I'm going to just move all these pieces over here together, and I need to figure out which one is which. They look all the same to me. So if I select that face and maybe that one, nope, it's not that. Let's go to that. Okay, so those two go together. Those are the front, the back of the wing. So let's see, how can we connect those up? That goes to that piece, or I could connect it to the back of that. I think that's a better bet because there's an overlap here. So I'm going to move that piece over here and the other one over on the other side. But we need to scale this stuff down, so let's bring it over. Just double check. All right, so that edge needs to match up. Select both of these shells together and scale them at the same time. Okay, so that looks good. I'm going to select that edge now, move and sew, and select that edge, move and sew. All right, and then these pieces are the front. Same deal. I'll bring this over here and make sure that I'm editing the correct edge. Okay, so I'm going to take that and scale it and rotate it, match it, do it at the same time. Okay, now I can select the edges, move and sew. Move and sew. All right. And the last piece is this piece, and we just need to make sure that it doesn't have any distortion on it. There's not a convenient way to hook this up in here without distorting faces, so this is just one of those places where you need to compromise a little bit. I am going to scale it down just a little bit so it can fit inside the 0 to 1 range. If you're painting in Photoshop, you know, sometimes it's nice to leave a little bit of space between all the shells so you can see them a little easier. Okay, we'll move that over. So you can also use the layout tool. So I could select all of these UVs and go to polygon layout. And if you go into the options here, we want to use per object to utilize as much UV space as possible. We can leave this on the default, separate shells off, and shell layout is going into the region, and we're scaling uniformly, and we're stacking shapes, not bounding boxes, so it will take into account all the angles and so on. And we're not going to rotate any. Although, you know what, if you do rotate, I would do a 90-degree rotation, so if you need to do symmetry in Photoshop, it's easier. So let's click Apply. And so that actually did a pretty nice job, except that it scaled down the overall size of our UVs. So I'm going to undo that, and this time I'm going to say no scale and see if it can help us. And so, you know, it's still not great. I think we're going to have to just manually lay this out, because I want to keep those main hulls as big as possible. and make sure it's not going off the edge. Okay. And that fits nicely right there. Okay. A little different than the first time I did it, but that looks like a pretty clean UV map. We just have to check the checker pattern and look around for any big distortion issues or non-uniform scaling of the texture. And it looks pretty good. There's a few places that might be a little stretched. Let's turn off the checker and turn on the distortion. And yeah, you can see there is some stretching going on. Red is stretching, blue is compression, white is optimal. But it's acceptable. And I think we would have good luck, good results painting with this texture. After I paused the video, I noticed something that I think I should change, and it's a good example of something else I wanted to show you, and that is cutting UVs. So we've talked about how to connect, merge, and sew UVs, but we haven't talked about how to cut UVs. And to do that, it's actually quite easy. All you do is you select the edges using your select tool. And the reason why I want to cut this is if you look at it, these pieces right here should be exactly proportional and parallel to each other. But you can see they actually taper. And that will lead to stretching and distortion. So I'm actually going to detach this front grill part and just keep it as a separate shell. And that will minimize the amount of distortion that we have. So I'm just going to select these edges. And then under polygon, I can basically cut the UV edges. And now it's a separate shell. All I have to do is hit Command to shell and detach it like that. Now I need to make sure that these UVs here are lined up correctly and relaxed. Let's use the smooth tool and unfold it rather. And it looks like it's a little crooked, so I'm going to have to basically select that last vertex and then snap it to the side. I'll select those, and this will snap to the furthest one on that side, and then this will snap up, and this will do the same. Okay, so now it's I think a much more accurate representation. If anything, we could bring these up a little bit more. Okay. So, and then just to make it easier to understand where that fits in the model, we can keep it close to the front of the ship. And then these pieces also need to be pulled down. All right. So now I would say that's a pretty accurate UV map. There's always going to be a compromise here and there, but for the most part, it's good. Let's move on to the head. Planar mapping actually is a pretty good way to do a head UV mapping because we want it to, we generally are taking pictures, reference photos, and mapping them onto the model, and it helps if we have those proportions perfectly straight. So there's no distortion, and we can easily match up the UVs to the actual photograph. And then the rest often has to just be painted and blended and manually tweaked. But there's always going to be a problem with a little bit of distortion, and that's just inherent in this kind of surface where there's lots of curves and contours and so on. And if we look at, let's say, that face right there on the nose and zoom into it, and then zoom in on the UV, you can see that there's they're different shapes. And so there's clearly some sort of, compression or stretching going on right here. And if we turn off the blue and turn on the stretching, we can see that, yeah, there's a lot of stretching in the red areas, and the blue areas are compressed. And there's not too much that you can do about that. There's always going to be a little bit of that in a model like this. But we'll do our best to minimize it. I want to show you just quickly how this would be done. I'm not going to go into every single detail, but I'll show you the general workflow. And so let's delete the UVs. And what I'll do is just do a planar map projection in the Z axis. And we're going to use a bounding box, Z axis, and definitely make sure that keep image width height ratio is turned on. Click project. Okay, so we have our UVs here in the UV texture editor. They're nice and proportional. However, there's lots of stuff overlapping. So if we turn on the UV shade display, you can see that there's a lot of purple and red. So we need to split this model open so we can unwrap it. And it's just like, if you could imagine, it's kind of gross, but if you can imagine, unskinning this, on a real human, how would you cut it open? You want to hide the seam in the back so it's not visible. And, if the person has hair, it makes it even easier because you don't have to worry about it. But I'm just going to go, maybe a little past the top of the head, something like that. And now I'll cut those UV edges. And I can also, what I often do is I'll separate the ears into separate shells as well. Whatever I can do to hide the seam, it's worth it. And modern painting, 3D painting programs like Mari, Mudbox, ZBrush, 3D Coat, all those programs do a really good job at painting over seams nowadays. It's not like, the old days, a mere, 6 or 7 years ago, where you really had to do this stuff manually and very carefully. It's not quite as bad as that anymore. There's some really great techniques and technologies available, but I like to keep my UVs really neat no matter what program I'm doing it in. Let's cut those UVs and do the same over here. So we'll go around the front. Okay. Now we'll cut that. All right. Okay, so now those ears are now separate shells, so I'm going to just move them to the side. Put one ear there and this one here for now. And the next thing that I do, because I have a texture map that's perfectly set up from a front view, I don't want to distort the UV map very much in the front, but I do want to anchor it in a few places so it doesn't get distorted too badly. So what I'll often do is I'll look at this model in the front view, and I'll just click on a few of the UV points. Excuse me, this. So and these UV points I'm going to use them and pin them. So maybe one on the front of the nose, and I try to keep it straight down the middle. Maybe one here at the base of the nose, one here. Wherever I see there's a big difference in contour, I try to think about how, if I pin it here, how will it wrap around that? It takes some practice and experience to understand the best way to do this. For example, underneath the neck, I don't want to just arbitrarily pin those because there's a lot of distortion going on there underneath the neck. So I need to let it unwrap naturally. So I'm not going to pin any UVs under the neck. But where the neck is facing me straight on, I think I can safely pin those pieces. Okay, so, and let's maybe do a couple here on the nose. And there's a lot of slope on that nose, so maybe it's safer to select up there and then maybe one here in the front of those. But this part right here is sloping quite a bit. All right, and then let's do a couple on the cheek. And where else? Maybe the eyebrows. Okay. All right, so I have some anchor points. And now I can just go to polygons, unfold. And we could try the unfold 3D. And that doesn't take into account our pins, but let's just see how it works. I'm curious. It's a new tool for me as well. And it's thinking. And it didn't really do anything for me. So I'm going to go back to Legacy. Pin UVs, pin selected UVs, click apply, and there we go. Boom, we got this crazy unwrap. And you know, this is the trick. Sometimes you have to undo and change the anchor points and you know, experiment where you know how this is going to unfold. Now I feel like it kind of spread out the back of the neck a little too far, and the ears are distorted as well. So if I look at this again, perhaps there's a way that I can anchor on the side here, maybe on the side of the eye, for example. Maybe one there, one there. Okay, let's try that. Okay, so I'm not happy with that even still, so I think I'm going to have to make another cut. And I spent all this time making these anchors, so I don't want to lose them. So I'm going to undo, and I'm going to make a selection set. So if I go to Create, Sets, Quick Select Set, this will be head, anchor, UV points. All right, so now I can just let go of those, and I can recall it again in the outliner in a moment. But I want to see where I've already made a cut as well. So if you go to Display, Polygons, Texture Border Edges, it will show you where the incisions are, and by making the line a little bolder. And I think to stop the UV map from unwrapping so dramatically and distorting the ear sockets and all that, I probably need to make another cut going from the side. So it's going to go all the way from that ear cut all the way over to this one. And I need to make sure I go all the way to that so it opens up on the back of the head. All right, let's cut that. All right. Now I can open up my outliner. And here are the UV points, the quick select set. So I'm just going to select set members and go to UVs. And now try the unfold operation again. And you can see we get a much more symmetrical and balanced unwrap. and it's, I think, much better. If we take a look at the distortion on it, the front is relatively optimized. It's mostly white, and it's really just the edges that are problematic. And so I'd say this is actually a pretty good unwrap, and it's just a matter of going into these areas here and maybe pushing and pulling a little bit. There is a tool that is called the smudge tool, and if you open that up, you can change it to be exponential, linear, or constant, exponential being the default size. And it has this brush. You can use the B key and middle mouse, B and left mouse, left and right, to change the scale of the brush. Okay, so with that smudge tool, we can push and pull these UVs and try to find a place where it turns a little more white. Let's try this side. And again, the edges are going to always be a little problematic. You know, these need a little more space. You know, where it's red, that means you need to give it a little more room. Blue, we need to compress it in. So the nose, I'm going to just take this whole area on the tip of the nose and use that smooth UV tool and unfold that a little bit. And it looks like it's getting a little distorted, so maybe let's select a smaller portion. Let's just relax it. Yeah, so I think if we select all those pieces and just relax it, especially the corners of the nose, we need to relax those. Do an unfold and relax and unfold. You sometimes have to go back and forth between the two. Okay, same with the eyes. You could use the lasso tool to make a selection around just the eyes, and let's go back and relax. Now, doing UV mapping on a head like this, where there's a lot of detail, it can take several hours to really get it perfect and clean and check things, make sure there's no overlapping polygons, and I often switch back and forth between the shaded UV view so I can look at it and see, oh, there we go, we have some pieces here that are overlapping, so I need to relax that. So it's kind of an arduous process, but it's definitely well worth it. If you take the time and make your UVs really clean, your textures will come out great. The mouth is probably going to have to be a separate piece as well, because there's a lot of overlapping and there's just no room left there for the inside of the mouth to unfold into. So the inside of the mouth would have to be a separate piece. It's going to go full screen on this. Edges. There we go. So that is going going to go over here out of the way. The ears, you might land up doing another projection on them. So if I select the faces on those ears and just project from in the X direction, now I do have to do some scaling, but I can then do the same thing I did for the face, pin the places to keep it in proportion and in the right shape, and then relax things around those pieces. So this one needs to be flipped. And I would just go around the model and find some places where I can anchor stuff, like maybe a point down here, a point up here, a point over here, and a point over there. And then, and also, I think these pieces are pretty good too, so a couple anchors there. And now we'll unwrap and pin UVs, pin selected UVs, click apply, boom. All right, and then you do the same on the other one. So you get the idea, I hope. And now a lot of people ask, how do you know what resolution your texture should be? And so let me show you how I calculate that. Let's just assume that this is, you know, all laid out nicely in 0 to 1 space. And let's say that my film is going to be HD 720. So that's 1280 by 720 pixels. And so what I do is I set up my camera with a resolution gate on. So I have a correct aspect ratio here. Let me just go into the preset here and go to HD 720. Okay, so I have my aspect ratio correct, and let's say I want to get up this close to the character. So what resolution texture do I need to paint for this model? Well, the way I calculate that is I take the viewport like this, and then using in the UVs, I'm just going to, or it doesn't matter what components you use, it could be faces, and I'll go to the edit menu and use the paint selection tool and select faces. And I'm just going to paint the portions that are visible within my viewport. Okay. So that's the general area, and we don't need any of this stuff over here. So that's my area that I need to worry about being high resolution. So this is the, at a minimum, the texture needs to be 1:1, 7200 DPI in that area. So what I do is I take a screenshot of just that area. I'm going to hit Command-Shift-3 on the Mac and take a screenshot, go into Photoshop, and let's open up that, and I'm just going to crop this. Doesn't have to be exact. This is just for rough calculation of texture size. And then I need to know the width of this. So I need to just drag a selection around around that area, around that region, and make a measurement, just so you can see this a little easier. I'll just make a black box. Okay, so this box is 150 pixels wide in this particular screenshot, but I need to up-res that 150 pixels to be 1280 pixels to be HD 720. Okay, from here we have to take the resolution 1280 and put that over the actual size that we just measured, so 150 pixels. And And we're just going to do a ratio calculation here. So you may remember this from math class in high school or junior high or something. So you basically put x over 100, and this will help us figure out what percentage we need to scale this up to. So we take 1280, multiply it by 100, and then divide it by 150. And that will give us the x value. So open up the calculator here and take 1280 times 100. We could just add 2 zeros, but all right. And then we'll divide that by 150. Okay, so we get 853. So we need 853. We need to scale up our image by 853%. And that will give us the appropriate high resolution 1-to-1 size that we need for this document. So I'm going to just scale it up, 853%. And you can see it gives us approximately a 5K image. And when I say 5K, generally what's done is we make our sizes compatible with binary numbers, and that works well with memory. So if you take 1024 and multiply that by 5, you get the correct 5K resolution. So 5120 is the 5K resolution that our image should be. So now we'll take a UV snapshot and we'll set this to be 5K, and we'll bring this into Photoshop. So I'm just choosing a location to save the file to. Make a new folder. Call it Spaceship Textures. And now let's just give it a name. Click OK. Yeah, we'll save it as a Targa, and then click OK. Now back in Photoshop, we can open up that file. Okay, so we have the file open, and you can see it's put the template and the color, and there's also an alpha channel with the same thing. So usually what I do is in the RGB layers, I'll just set that to black, and I'll use the alpha. I'll load that as a selection and make a separate layer and fill that selection to white. So we essentially are creating a transparent layer with that UV template on it. I'll just hit Command Delete because my background is white, so I can hit Command Delete to fill it to white. And let's rename this UV template. So now from here, it's painting time. And you can just create separate layers for the different parts and add effects and textures. And this is my favorite part of the process is the painting. Let's try adding some detail to the hull just so you can see how this works. So I'll make a selection around the bottom part of the ship and start painting that. Maybe we'll do like a red or a white or something. I guess, you know, if we look at stealth aircraft, they often have a brighter color on the bottom. So when you look up at the ship, they are relatively camouflage against the backdrop of the sky. And then the bottom is darker color. So if you're looking down at the ship from above, it kind of blends in with the terrain. So maybe a red. Yeah, actually, let's just make it a white. I think that'll be better. So I'm going to add a layer style on this, and you can just turn on like inner shadow, for example, and that can add like a nice little fall off around the edge. mean, in real life, nothing's really perfect. So by adding little details like this, it makes it a lot more believable. So I'm just playing around with the opacity of the inner shadow. And let's take a look at the fin. So I think the fin could be red. Okay, we'll fill that to red, and let's do the same thing. We'll add a layer style and do an inner shadow just to, so it's sort of mimicking an ambient occlusion kind of effect by doing this. All right, let's do the top part of the hull. Okay, and let's maybe do a dark gray. And yeah, do the same thing. We'll add a layer style, inner shadow. Let's do a grill. Let's add some, we'll simulate what it would look like if there was a grill. So I'll use a gradient and we'll go from white to transparent. And we'll just duplicate this a whole bunch of times, and it will look similar to as though we actually modeled this. Okay, now I'm also going to add like a darker fill underneath that. So this is kind of the inside of the vent. So I'll put that underneath the grill that we just added, and just hide that temporarily so I can see where I'm tracing. I'm just going to make a selection here inside this interface, and we'll set that to be black. All right, so we'll set that to black, Command Delete to fill to the background color. All right, now let's turn that grill back on, and we can add a clipping mask. So Option click inside of in between those two layers, and it will turn it into a clipping mask. And now I can play around with the opacity and make it a little more metallic-like. All right, maybe some other things that we could add are bolts and rivets. So I'll just select my marquee tool and make a circle. All right. So let's just put a little drop shadow on this. And we can move around the shadow, but I think I'll set it so that it doesn't have very much distance. Okay, and we can also put a texture overlay on top of that, just to roughen it up a little bit. It's important when you're doing this kind of work to not be too perfect. If you want it to look realistic, almost nothing in the real world is perfect. And I think that by roughing it up a little bit, adding textures, grime and so on, wear and tear, that's what really makes things believable. Just duplicate these bolts a few times. I'm just option dragging. Okay, let's add some on the sides as well. All right, let's select those, duplicate them, and put them on the other side. Command or Control T allows me to get into that quick transform. Let's maybe darken up this hull a little bit. And one last touch that I think would be nice, just to show you what I mean by distressing the object. Let's add a little bit of streaking on the bottom of the hull and the front of the ship. So I could just do some scribbles here with my mouse, and from here we could just blur it or motion blur it, and this will just kind of make it a little more real and used and worn. And let's go up to blur and do a motion blur, and we'll just set that to be vertical, and let's crank the value until it looks like streaks, as though maybe since it's flying so fast it's pulling some dirt across there over time. And let's hit Command T and then select perspective, and we can set that to fit the shape of the hull. All right, so we're looking good. Let's save this out and bring it into Maya. So it's important to always save the Photoshop file, so if you need to make any edits later, of course, you can do so. But the file that we actually assigned to the model in Maya should be in something like a TIFF format or a Targa or a PNG. All right, 24 bits, good. All right, back in Maya. Let's just assign a simple shader to this. Generally when I'm doing this kind of work, I work with very simple shaders because they're a little faster to set up. The Mia materials are awesome, but there's just so many attributes on them. I find it easier to use a simple shader at first to just make sure the texture is lining up okay, and then I'll convert it to a Mia material down the road. Okay, so it's appearing black right now because it's a 5K image, and I have a really cheap consumer graphics card on this particular computer that I'm working with, so it's not capable of displaying the textures. It's just too much. And so we would have to down-res it. Now, Viewport 2.0 does allow you to bake larger textures, but again, I don't think that my graphics card really supports anything like that. So I'm just going to move on and do my resizing in Photoshop. And I also noticed that I forgot to turn off the UV template layer, so let's just turn that off, and I'm going to save it and then resize it and save out a new Targa version, and I'll call that the same name, but I'll tag it with a suffix of 2K, so I know that it's a 2K image. We don't need the alpha, and I'll just command click on that name to save over it. And now let's close the Photoshop, open up that Targa, and we'll resize it to 2048. And save this, again with the suffix of 2K. Okay, and back in Maya, now we can swap out the texture for the new 2K one. And there we go. Happy UVing.